Listen, what do I say? Do you see a movie? Do you see a movie? This is an example of fast English naturally spoken. You probably heard this: d, see and movie. A native speaker of English would hear this. Do you see a movie? Exactly the same. We all hear the same sounds, whether we're native speakers of English or not native speakers. Yet native speakers understand these sounds in the gaps perfectly, even though they didn't hear what they are. Why is that? Let me explain. Well, first, everyone does this. We all hear the content words when people are speaking. The content words are the most important words. Here we have see and movie, a verb and a noun. Sometimes this is enough to understand everything, but not always. Sometimes we need to do some extra things, and these are the things that expert listeners do. Expert listeners also use intonation and grammar knowledge automatically as they hear things. This is a skill developed through practice. But the most important skill is using context. This is done in the moment and anyone can do it. So let's go through these 4 things. First of all, we all heard the content words, see and movie. But how do we know what the other words are? Well, firstly, we need to use intonation. Do you see a movie? Do you see a movie? Notice that my voice generally went up through the statement. Do you see a movie? And when we do this, this often indicates that we are asking a question. This up intonation often indicates a question. Expert listeners instinctively check for intonation so that they know whether it's a statement or a question or something else. And now we know it's a question, we can start using our grammar knowledge to work out what should go in the gaps. Notice that first sound. We heard something like a d sound. Do you see a movie? We know that questions often start with auxiliary words or modals or what we call WH words. So this could be do, does, did, have, who, what, where. But we have this d sound at the beginning. So we know that we can eliminate all the sounds which are completely different. Do you see a movie? Well, it's not going to start with have or who. It's going to be a selection of the words shaded here, do, does or did. And we'll come to which one we choose in the next part, in part 4. So we know we have a question word starting with d, but what comes next grammatically in a question? Well, usually we have the subject of the sentence. And in this case, the subject could be one of these. It could be a pronoun, I, you, it, she, he, so on. It could be just a name, or it could be another noun in that position. But if this unknown word was a name or a noun, we would have heard it more clearly. Why? Because these words are stressed in speech. It would have been a content word, so we would have said it more clearly and it would have become one of those words we automatically heard, like see and movie. However, pronouns are not always stressed. So there's a good chance, because we didn't hear the sound clearly, there's a good chance it was a pronoun, because the sounds we don't hear clearly tend to be the sounds which are not stressed. So that helps us work out what this word is, but we still need to go to step 4 before we work out exactly what it is. So we know we start with a question word, then the subject. Then the rest of the grammar for a standard question works like this. We have the verb and we have a noun afterwards, the object of the sentence. But there was one more sound between see and movie that we heard, but we didn't hear it clearly. What could it be? Well, we know that nouns often come after articles like a or the. And a or the are weak forms. So it could have filled this gap because we know the sound was weak. We didn't hear it clearly, so it must have been a weak form. It can't be a content word like Jane's movie, because if it was a content word, we would have heard it clearly. So we're looking for a word that could be weakened. So now we know these 3 things, we're now ready for the final step, and that is use context. We know the grammar we're expecting. We know it's going to be a question because of the intonation, but Using context will help us know exactly what should go in each gap. When we ask questions, they usually come as part of a conversation. And in conversations, what we say is usually connected to what was said before. So people can get away with being weak in their sounds because where they're being weak, they're using words which are connected to what was said before. So the person listening can work out what's being said. Let's put this to the test. I'm going to show you part of the conversation that came before our question. Listen to the previous speaker. After listening to them, can you now work out what those sounds in the question mean? I went to the cinema yesterday. Do you see a movie? What do the sounds in the gaps mean? Well, we know the grammar we're expecting, and that, together with the context, helps us fill in the gaps. First of all, in the statement before, the person says, I went to the cinema yesterday. So that means we're looking for a past tense auxiliary word beginning with D, which is obviously did. Because the statement was, I went to the cinema yesterday, well, if you're asking a question related to what's said before, it must be did. We have the D sound, and that's obviously the word that will fit that gap. Next, with the pronoun. Which pronoun do we need after did? Well, in the statement before, the person says, I went to the cinema yesterday. If you're asking a question immediately afterwards within a conversation, then obviously the question is going back to the person who spoke. So I becomes you. Did you see? Do you see? Did you see? But because did and you are grammar words, we can weaken them. People weaken them. So you have to use this content and grammar knowledge in order to work out what they meant. Now, see, we already know because we heard it clearly the first time. But what about the next sound between see and movie? We're expecting a grammar word and we think it would usually be an article. Let's consider the statement, the cinema. I went to the cinema yesterday. Now, if it was going to be, did you see the movie? Normally we say the movie. We use the word the when we know exactly what the movie means. Perhaps there's a particular movie that we'd mentioned in the conversation before. But that doesn't happen here. We just have the words cinema. We don't know anything about the movie. It could be any movie. And because we don't know what the movie is, and it could be any movie, we use the indefinite article a to represent the fact that we could be speaking about anything. Do you see a movie? A movie means one out of possibly many. And then finally, we have the word movie, which we've already heard. So these expert listeners only heard 2 out of the 5 words clearly. Have you ever had that experience where someone speaks, you know they've used a lot of words, but you only hear 2 or 3 of them clearly? Well, expert listeners have that experience too. But these expert listeners understood perfectly through hearing the content words, hearing the intonation, using grammar knowledge, and using the context of the whole conversation. And those are the skills that you should aim to develop if you have trouble understanding what people say because you miss certain sounds. And you can learn much more about advanced English speaking and pronunciation through my course. There's a link in the description below this video if you'd like to find out more.